I'm Dane Rose, and in this video I want to portray an aspect of mental emotional disease, an aspect of psychology that's very meaningful for me in the way that I experience it, and that reminds me a little bit of a movie I once saw in which a number of residents in a mental institution who were typically disjointed in a certain fog for a brief period of time awakened, were self-aware, and had the ability to create. And I believe it was chemically induced. But the area that I want to explore with you is a phenomena of co-infection, of mental emotional dis-ease. It looks very much like this. And so here's the self, and here is the outer world. And the relationship with the self and the outer world exists on a continuum. We are not just one person. Let's tilt this over here. We're not just one person. We are on a continuum. We have, quote, good days and bad days. More accurately, our expression with the outside world, our interaction with the outside world exists on a continuum. And that continuum exists in a probability field, in a possibility field that includes the very worst possibility and the very best possibility. And in ecological paradigm, the very best and the very worst, if we use an example of a rose exists on a continuum, meaning if you do not water the rose, if you put the rose in the shade, if you give it highly alkaline soil, and you step on it, the rose will die in a matter of hours or days, and certainly will not bloom and be lush. And so the rose exists in a probability field, from withered stub of diseased rose stem without a single flower to abundant leaf, to luxurious growth, and rapid, healthy, non-aphidid leaves with fragrant, beautiful flowers. So this is the probability of the rose. Now, the rose is not going to turn into a monkey, whether you water it a million times a day or not at all. The rose is not going to turn into a whale. The rose is not going to start talking. The rose is not going to do calculus, meaning the probability of a rose is somewhat set, as is the probability of each individual. I'm not just going to take up the violin and play a Stradivarius like Mozart, nor am I going to do advanced calculus, but there is nonetheless a range within my probability field that, based on my skills, based on my knowledge, based on my stamina, based on the capacities of my body — again, my body is not going to suddenly lift 2-ton weights, but under great stress and in high danger situations trying to rescue a kid, I might lift up a 600-pound weight enough to help him get out, or something along those lines. There is a probability field. And in any form of dis-ease, what we're looking at is a strain on the probability field. For example, with a rose, Optimum condition is slightly acidic soil, well mulched, well draining, watered 2 or 3 times a day briefly, with nitrogen and fertilizer, with bright sunlight, with breezy wind, and protection from hurricanes, and no deer, just as an example. So if this was the perfect situation, that every rose put into that situation is going to bloom like mad, be beautiful, be lush, etc., then we have the mid-range environment. The mid-range environment is you water it once a week. You have no mulch in the soil. There's very little organic matter. There's not much nitrogen. It gets gusted with wind, followed by, lulls. There's not quite enough light, but it survives. And then the low end of the continuum of the rose is, no water, deep shade, traffic of buffalo stomping over it, and that rose is completely dead. Now, every human being has an environment that, reflects its peak potential, mentally, emotionally, and physically. Meaning there is an environment. There is an environment that if you were put in that environment, where all your fears would go away, where your creativity would grow exponentially, where your joy, your safety, your sense of, and with it your love, would amplify, where you'd like yourself, where you would accept and love other people as they are, with understanding. There is an environment in which you will naturally be your most fulfilled and happy self, and where those nagging guilts and promises to do stuff that has nothing to do with your well-being and stuff would just fall away. And where you are happy, fulfilled, growing, alive, abundant, filled with energy, there is an environment in which that you exists. And all you have to do is enter that environment for that to be an almost certain probability. It may, depending on how diseased you are, how much trauma, the whole thing. There's a time cycle within the human condition for certain things to be learned. But, for example, if every time you told the truth and shared a need and expressed a fear, there was sympathy, compassion, responsiveness, and honor for your feelings, you'd suddenly find yourself incredibly transparent and enjoying it immensely. If your feminine side, your innocence, your vulnerability, your emotionality, your tenderness, your responsiveness, your curiosity, your spontaneity, your energy was celebrated without the backlash of up, you've gone too far, up, you forgot your duties, do your homework and all that, you would find yourself in a wonderland of exploring that energy. There is an environment in which you are your best self. May or may not take a little time, depending on the pre-existing condition and the memory and all that, but in which you absolutely become your best self. Now, there is also an environment in which you die. Just one among many, an environment where there is machine gun fire that covers every square inch in the terrain of your body. You are dead in a matter of seconds. Not quite so fast, but with fluoride in the water, with chlorine in your blood, with 80,000 chemicals floating around in the environment and born into a world in which your body has a certain chemical load, flooded with cortisol, shaken, dropped, shouted at, abandoned, left to be run over, kept in the dark, silenced, raged at, shouted at some more, told that you're a horrible person, lied to repeatedly, have your vulnerability laughed at, have your vulnerability humiliated on a regular basis, blamed for stuff you had no control over, asked to do something you couldn't do and then blamed for failing, having your gifts thrown back in your face as unwanted, having your curiosity, denied, having your heart broken repeatedly by people who shamed you for believing them, rather than apologized for breaking your heart. People shouting at you, people not inviting you to the table, loneliness that went unanswered, pills that you took to, swallow down some of that feeling, numbing some of your alertness and your engagement, leading to more isolation, leading to more despair. There are environments that bring out not necessarily immediate death, but that bring out your worst self. And each of us has a probability field between our very best self and our worst self. Now, the environment, also, when we have a mental emotional disease, a constellation or a pattern that is not symmetrical, that is not balanced, that therefore in the cycle of life is more like a lump, we're going up and down, rather than the graceful flow of a bicycle wheel that is symmetrical. A dis-ease is when that symmetry gets bent out of shape. As we go forward, it's up and then it's crash, and then up and then crash, or it doesn't move at all, or it gets stuck at a certain point, and just keep working at it month after month. Oh, finally it turned a little bit, and then boom, stuck again. And oh gosh, it's happened again, and the stress, and then car crashes into you, and you have to repair. There are these diseases, these patterns to cope with an unhealthy environment, to cope with pain, that are part of consciousness, meaning you have the essential self that is born very neutral into this probability field. And then as the self interacts with the environment and interacts with asymmetries in the environment. What's an asymmetry? For example, someone who always takes and never gives. Well, that's asymmetrical. And so if you interact with enough people that always take and never give, you either die because you don't have anything left. Let's say they keep taking your money, they keep taking your body, they keep taking your mind, they keep taking your goodwill, and you just have nothing left. Now, this can drain you. You can die, you can live in despair, or you can create symmetry by becoming a taker. Maybe you can't figure out how to stop your parents or an authority figure or an uncle taking and taking and taking, but you can take from someone else. You find a way to create symmetry, but you do it by creating a new asymmetry, meaning someone's always taking from you. Perhaps it's your job. Perhaps every single day of your life, when you come back from work, there is less of your soul present than there was in the morning. Perhaps every day you have less energy than you had in the morning. Perhaps every day you have less desire to live than you had in the morning. So you're in a pattern where the job is soul sucking. And so your soul is being sucked into that job, and there is less and less of your soul. Now, when that goes on asymmetrically indefinitely, and you want to keep your soul alive, you have a couple of choices. You can leave the job, or you can soul suck from someone else. For example, I had a girlfriend who aspired to a soul-sucking job. I mean, she didn't like it. It sucked out her soul. But she had been told by her father that she wasn't good enough to make it in corporate life. And so she didn't mind her soul being sucked out. What she minded was the idea that she wasn't good enough. And so what she wanted to do was prove that her father was wrong. And so she put everything into this soul-sucking job to prove him wrong. And what she wanted me to do at the end of the day was give her my soul so that she could give that and her own to the job and still feel okay. And so this is importing the asymmetry. So you had a soul-sucking job rather than stopping the job or demanding and having a meeting and saying, look, how are we going to get my soul back? It's not a very common conversation in corporate America. We'll just bring someone else. In other words, you can be a soul-sucking corporate employee and just befriend an artist who has a lot of soul and borrow and take his soul and then send it on to the job and then take more and send it on to the job until that relationship says, wait a minute, you're just sucking out my soul so that you can give it to a career that doesn't give anything to you, anything to us, anything to me at all. It takes more and more of the woman I love and eats it up. It doesn't give more and more back. And so, so there's different responses, but we either die, wither, slowly or quickly. We can die in an instant or we can die over 50 years. We can wither in an instant, or we can wither and enter a mediocre state over 10, 20, 30 years. We either change the environment such that we have a new context that brings out the best in us, or we pull in an asymmetrical relationship with someone else. So if a company is losing money, one option is to transform the company so it makes money. Another option is to keep losing money and then find a benefactor to keep funding the money-losing company. And the other is to end the relationship with the company. So it keeps losing money, but it's not losing your money. You're separate from the company. So this is, just a little bit of paradigm and contextual background about how a environment interacts with an individual to bring out different parts of that individual, to take from that individual or to give to that individual, and how this relates to the probability field where we have a sense of being at our worst self, down here, or the sense of being at our best self up here, depending on our success in finding an optimum environment. Now, needless to say, people are a lot more complicated than roses. All a rose needs is a certain pH, a certain amount of sunlight, a certain amount of air movement, a certain amount of water, roots in the soil, leaves and flower in the sun, not to be stepped on. It's not too complicated to create the optimum environment for a rose. However, people are, of course, a lot more complicated. For one thing, roses don't, to our knowledge, have feelings, and they certainly don't talk about them. You don't go to water a rose and have it say, hold on there, Buster, you didn't water me yesterday on time. How do you think, who gives you the right to just show up and water me today? If you won't water me on a regular basis, I don't want any water from you. And it's like, well, surely some water is better than none. Don't give me that lip. Who do you take me for? You can't, a rose doesn't go into that kind of, emotional programming and dynamics the way a human being might. And so, humans have mental ecology, emotional ecology, and physical ecology that is far more complex than a rose, because a rose is stationary and a rose has relatively little potential You don't have one rose become a calculus professor and another rose a music teacher. Roses pretty much bloom and smell great and create more roses. So the variables are more unique. There's also this fact of symmetry and balance, and what it means is that if on an emotional level a series of experiences occur in the environment that imprint on your sense of identity, in which, let's say, not a single person listens to you when you are in a very deep state of urgency and trauma around something, you've been raped, and help, and people keep going by. And then you tell someone and say, oh, can I call you back? And then you call your friend and their first thought is, what were you thinking? And nobody is actually listening to the fact that you need to get moved from here to here to get out of harm's way. And so when this imprints on your identity, meaning when this experience is so intense that you actually say, I am the person that no one listens to. This is when a pattern on the outside is so impactful that it shapes who we feel that we are. So I am the person that my parents didn't listen to, that my teacher wouldn't listen to, that none of my boyfriends listen to, that my dog doesn't listen to, that my best friend busy texting when I'm talking to her about important things. I am the person that no one listens to. Well, once you form an identity that is asymmetrical, as opposed to sometimes I don't listen and sometimes other people don't listen and sometimes I listen and sometimes they listen, which is a symmetrical dynamic, then it's out of whack. It's like, if you imagine this as a tree, it's leaning far to the right. Now, the reason this is important in the context of mental emotional disease and optimal environments is that someone who has developed an identity from repeated past experience of an intense nature, that no one listens to me, because we cling to our identities as a source of stability, it kind of, you've been raped, you're traumatized. Will you listen to me? No. Will you listen to me? No. Will you? And there's this sense of hope. There's this sense of uncertainty. Maybe you will listen to me. No, you didn't know. You didn't know. You didn't know. You didn't. No one listened to me. And then finally, when one person did listen to me, they didn't listen to how terrifying it was. They didn't listen to how it impacted me. They listened to the version of what happened in their own imagination. And then they listened to how they would have responded or imagined they responded to. For example, most men have not been stalked and raped. And so a man trying to understand that, well, why didn't you run away? There's no sense of terror and fear around that because men, for the most part, have never been sexually stalked. Men might know exactly what that feel if hordes of homosexual men went around with guns and whips and stuff and captured heterosexual men and fucked them. But that doesn't happen that very often. So, a woman sensing an instinct around that and knowing there's not people there and last time no one believed her, this is a completely different world. So even though, okay, fine, you're safe. Is anyone raping you right now? Okay, what's the big deal? I've got a TV, a sports game to watch. This is an experience. Okay, if one person heard me, they didn't hear the terror. They didn't hear what my experience was. No one listens to me. And at a certain point, the disappointment, the frustration, the uncertainty, the desperation is resolved by an identity that is stable. I'm not the one who's going to reach out again. I am the one who no one listens to. Now, this is very important because once we create an identity, we try and reinforce the identity in order to feel certainty and feel stability. because before that, we were the person that we thought people would listen to, but they didn't. And they didn't, but they might at the next time, they might at the next time. Each time they didn't, it was so disappointing. But once you develop the certainty that no one listens to us, it turns into something, for example, such as self-pity and certainty, which is much more manageable. Meaning if you are in trauma and you don't know if someone will listen or not, and you go into resigned self-pity as an identity, and you say, no one ever listens to me. That's just the way it is. I've come to terms with it. No big deal. I get it. Nobody ever listens to me. That's my lot. They never have. They never will. I'm giving up on people listening to me. In fact, I have an identity. I am the one who no one listens to. And now in order to maintain that identity, one must note and remember and recrystallize the moments in which one is not listened to. One must, regurgitate and recreate those moments, and then one must exclude the other moments. Why? Because identities protect us from chaos and the unknown. When we have had traumatizing events, a sense of certainty protects us from the overwhelm and the uncertainty in that trauma. And so the certainty that no one will listen to is far more comforting than maybe you will tonight, maybe you won't. Maybe you will listen but not understand. Maybe you will understand but not let me finish my sentence. Maybe you will listen for 10 minutes and then say you want to go to bed. This is very chaotic. But no one ever listens to me. That's very solid. And so no one can budge me on that. And I can just sulk in the corner. Lonnie, what's wrong? Oh, nothing. No one ever listens to me. Something seems to be wrong. You're not smiling. No, nothing. No one ever listens to me. See, you're not going to listen. See, you didn't look at what was going on. You didn't see me. No one listens to me. And this identity feels comforting and it's certain. Now, if someone actually gets in your face and says, hey, I've asked you 3 times, what is going on? It's like, well, wait a minute. People don't listen to me. Well, I've tried to 3 times, and so, but my point is, a constellation or a pattern of unbalance, no one ever listens to me, to be healed must create a medicine in which there is almost no possible way to not feel heard. So, for example, if you want to provide medicine for this particular constellation, no one ever listens to me, flip it the other way around. Put 20 people in the room, every single person present, aware, wanting to be nowhere else, saying they'd like to be nowhere else, inviting you to talk as long as you want to talk about anything you want to talk about, to validate your self-pity, to hear your past experiences, to list your grievances, to hear your anger, to hear your hurt, to hear your rage. Then you can kind of go in initially, well, nobody wants to hear this. And then you watch someone else and they talk about all those shadow bits and it's like, well, they heard them, but of course they don't want to hear mine. And then someone else talks in the circle and everyone hears and validates everything they have to say. And eventually it dawns that in this instance, in this circle at this time, everyone wants to listen to me. And so this shatters the constellation, the identity built on this happening a lot in a given situation. There are some environments where people want to listen to me, and there are some environments where no one wants to listen to me. But I am not the person that no one listens to. I am who I am, and when I go to work, no one wants to hear my feelings. When I talk with my boyfriend, he doesn't want to hear about my day. When I talk with my mother, she doesn't want to hear about my boyfriend. When I talk with my best friend, she doesn't want to hear about the great sex I had because she's lonely. But when I go to this circle and talk to my monk or my therapist, they do want to hear everything I have to say. Now, I can't fit it into an hour, and so when I go to this circle, I can talk for 5 hours about everything I wanted to say. And so I am now a person who in some environments, and so to heal these imbalances requires a systemic, strong imbalance on the other side. Meaning, if you go from a trauma in which absolutely no one listened to you, and then go into a situation where people are scatterbrained attention but somewhat want to listen to you, it doesn't break the identity. You need to go into another environment where you see and experience over and over again 10, 20 people at a time totally wanting to listen to you, celebrating everything you have to say, hearing it, getting it, feeling it, emoting it, demonstrating that they've got it physically, emotionally, mentally, feeding it back to you, active listening. And it's like, yes, someone actually does listen to me. I'm now no longer trapped in the rigidity of that identity. And so that then is a dis-ease that clears. It's like the flowing water that turns into ice, and then it melts and starts flowing again. So this is the pattern of flow in life, or arresting and dis-ease. Water is flowing and alive. Now it's frozen. It's ice. It can't move. Warmth comes in and it flows, and because cold comes in, it becomes arrested. And we are very much like this in the process of growing up. We're growing up, we're growing up, we're growing up, and then something hits us hard at 2 years old. We reach out for security, repair, reassurance, love, comfort. It's not there. We get actually, I don't know if you've ever noticed this, but I stepped on my dog's tail the other day, and of course he's screaming, but his screaming and the fact that he darted under my foot right as I was walking, meaning, when I was about to take the step, he was nowhere to be seen. I then look up and take the step, hear this scream, and I look down and I'm stepping on my dog. Now this is a shock to my system, meaning I'm in shock because of the bark, because I didn't see what happened, because it happened too fast, because I'm horrified that I stepped on my dog. And this shock, helplessness, surprise, it's painful, I don't know what to do, I feel, this panic, all this hits my body in a second. And then the first thought is, I can't do any better. Meaning, I've got to navigate safely. And if a dog can run under my foot in the space it takes to look, take a step, looking up, and then look down again and take another step, that dog will be stepped on if you are in close proximity to that dog sometimes. So first I feel the startle, I feel the panic, I feel what's going on, how'd this happen? I quickly calculate that I did not make a mistake. It's not like I wasn't watching where I was going. The dog rapidly, in that split second, ran under my foot. And there wasn't anything happened that would allow me to predict that. It's not like I had just thrown a bacon piece in front of my foot. It's not like anyone was calling the dog. And there was no cue that let me know that that would happen. So this tells me that there's nothing I can do to change it. This tells me that from time to time, as a statistical probability, living in close proximity with this particular dog, I'm going to step on it. Now this horrifies me. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm shocked. I do not want to be someone who steps on dogs and makes them scream. I feel terrible. Now, the key is, in my equation, this particular dog rushes under my feet when I'm walking. So all of my panic and concern for the dog, first of all, I feel guilty. I feel I've done something wrong. Then I say, wait a minute, I can't do any better. And then I'm angry at the dog. And this takes place in less than 2 seconds. Meaning I go from what the hell happened to mortified to anger at my dog. How dare you rush under my feet and make me into a dog stepper for no apparent reason? I mean, obviously, I have no idea what he was up to, which means I will have no idea what he's up to next time. And I'm furious because I don't like being shocked. I don't like hearing sudden yelps. I don't like things rushing around underneath me. I don't like hurting animals. And I don't like feeling like I'm a bad dog owner, because if anyone's around or whatever, they're going to say, why is Dane step on his dog? There's none of that I want. And because I don't know how to change it, meaning I literally don't know and don't know that I can know what went on there with that dog, because I don't want it to happen, because it shocked me, because I get angry when I get shocked because it goes through a terrified cycle, and this ties in with my 2-year-old and deep trauma. The dog has kind of reactivated this sense of helplessness. And so I go from remorse to hating the dog for what it's done to me, for what it's evoked in me, for what it is no doubt going to evoke over the next 10 years, every single time it rushes under my feet. And I want to shout at the dog. You idiot! What are you doing? I mean, what's going through your mind? You're this big, and you look up at this 10 times bigger animal moving around, and you say, "Oh, they're moving in this direction. I'm going to rush into that moving object and get under their feet." I mean, so I'm angry at the dog for having such an absurd impulse that I can't figure out and can't protect the dog against, and so I can't protect myself against. And so what I'm getting at is, if you pay attention to parents and 2 years old, they do the same thing. The 2-year-old decides it's going to walk out in the street. Now, the 2-year-old maybe gets hit, maybe gets shouted at, maybe has this fast vehicle move in front of it. And the 2-year-old just knows, wow, that is terrifying. I'm completely overwhelmed. I'm just moving along, and then just suddenly this massive metal just floods by me and almost blew me over, and I could have died. Now, right at the moment, I want to be cuddled and held by my parent, and, oh, you're safe from this bizarre phenomena. The parent rushes out, snatches me, "Listen up, what are you doing?" and shouts at me. And now I have no escape. I am completely dissociated and overwhelmed because my repair person has now escalated the trauma by shouting at me and letting me know I'm not welcome, I'm bad, I've done something horrible, and I have no idea what it is. I just know I almost died with this vehicle, and now I'm almost killed by my parent, and now I'm a bad person, and I have nowhere to turn to, and I just collapse psychically into, I feel horrible, I feel a mistake, I'm so horrible. And then the parent says, and then the parent continues lecturing. You idiot, stop doing it, we don't walk in. Of course, the baby can't talk, so the parent just behaving nonsensically and ranting at the child. So the parent gradually calms down over the next 20 minutes as they have given their child PTSD. Intense trauma followed by intense trauma, followed by rage and dissociation. And when the parent has calmed down and the baby's no longer crying, perhaps dissociate, they put them away or they put them in another room and just say, "Be quiet now, I've got to go and do work." And now the baby gets the complete message there is no space for their feelings, and they do not exist. Meaning their version of reality, the fact that they don't want to be born in a world where cars drive that fast, the fact that they don't want to be born into a world where being curious for 30 seconds could kill them. They don't want to be in a world where they're watched by one adult. They don't want to be in a world where they're shouted at when their life is in danger as opposed to the parent. But they are in that world. And nothing is going to be done about it other than to rage at them, because the parent feels 20 times more helpless, more terrified. What will people think of them if their baby is run over by a car? What would have happened? How would they feel? This is this enormous surge of emotion, and this tiny psyche, this tiny ego, gets this huge discharge of hate, fear, panic, desperation, guilt, shame, love, resentment, terror, uncertainty, panic, dissociation, all right into the eye of the child. At a moment it needs deep calming from the near death with the vehicle. And that's just one example. What about the dog that attacks the child? What about the older brother that ties him in a tree? What about this one form after another in which the infant's life and existence is threatened in some way by an overwhelming environment that is not prepared and designed for children, that is then followed by the panic and trauma of the parent who realizes the vulnerability in the child, or the trauma and the panic of the child who realizes the parent doesn't care and that no one's going to come and help them, and they're just going to be locked in this cupboard as long as their older brother decides to torment them or whatever it is. Now, these patterns at young ages arrest the flow of emotion, meaning at the point of trauma and at the point of overwhelm that the psyche of the child cannot process, and that the adult, rather than lifting off of the child, is dumping all of the energy that the adult cannot hold. Meaning an adult that is thinking, what would happen to my life if that baby died in that instant? The court case that I can't deal with, the job that I can't mess up with right now, the husband that told me I'm a loser and didn't walk for my job, and the divorce, the people who would look at me like a criminal, the family members that would judge me again as being irresponsible. And I realized that this baby in 30 seconds has the power to totally decimate everything I'm attached to. And there's nothing I can do about it. And I hate that child, and I'm angry at that child, and I'm enraged at that child, and I'm terrified as hell, and I'm guilty as hell, and I feel like a bad person for having these feelings, and I don't want anyone to see it, and I don't want this, and I don't want this, and I have no control whatsoever. And I can't hold all these emotions. Nobody taught me how to be a parent. Nobody taught me what it was like to be in this culture. No one, and I give all of that to the child to make sure they understand what I'm going through as an adult child who doesn't know how to parent in a culture that hasn't prepared for parenting, in an environment that is hostile to infants. And so this hits a child, and what happens when it blows the circuitry of the child is the child dissociates, and at the point it dissociates, it freezes in place, it crystallizes, it forms an ice in the shape of the trauma. So the hate, the terror, the loneliness, the overwhelm crystallizes and does not move and evolve forward. So every time this happens, it forms a shape. And so the first form, let's say it's 1 or 2 years old, and it's absolute terror, absolute shame, absolute loneliness. Now, in order to once this has crystallized and not been healed for the child, the outer world is here. Once that constellation is formed, you can see its shape here. There is a point, meaning, let's say that this fries the child's adrenals. that it shoots cortisol through the roof and freezes it open in a state of PTSD. Nevertheless, at 1 or 2 years old, if you completely hold the child, if you completely rhythmically breathe with the child, if you're with them without shocking noises for more than 2 hours, if you are not nervous as an adult because you don't have anything on your schedule, there is a certain algorithm, a combination lock that will release the constellation for the child in that moment for that period of time. And then there is another moment where any number of those constellations, will tumble differently and the lock will close again and not open. So what I mean is the self is still in here, but after that traumatizing event of the 1 and 2 year old, it has a constellation frozen that now has to have a certain number of tumblers before this gap in the constellation opens up and there is the direct flow of the essence of the child into the environment without the interference of this dis-ease, of this structure of pain and overwhelm and energy management. Now, as the child gets to 3 or 4 years old, these types of things happen over and over again. So at 2 years old, it was running out into traffic. At 4 years old, it's the 2 years old older brother, the 6-year-old, who tries to pour a bucket of water down the child, and the parent is enraged at both children because of the same emotional overload we just went into the car. But now it's like, what is my daughter doing pouring a 5-gallon bucket into a 4-year-old's mouth? What is she doing putting a plastic bag that could suffocate the baby over their head and drawing faces on it? Because what a parent realizes is exactly what I realized with the dog. What a parent realizes is they do not have the imagination to prepare for this outrage. Meaning, there's no parenting manual, there's none at all, but the few that you glance through to try and figure out what to do, there's not a single one that says when your child is 6 years old, they will, for no apparent reason, get a plastic bag, draw on it, and put it over the infant child, and then see what happens. And it's up to you, parent, to be around so that that child doesn't suffocate when that occurs. So you don't get the warning. There is no warning. You walk in, your baby is half suffocated, and your 6-year-old is studying it, watching to see what happens with the plastic bag. And the outrage happens again. You fucking sons of bitches. Who the fuck do you think you are? Do you think that while I'm running this career, while I'm cleaning the house, while I'm listening to your father, while I'm eating shit from my boss, while I'm getting email that doesn't belong, while I'm dealing with my credit card that my bank has decided the PIN number is going to be changed again because of suspicious activity, because I bought a $3 item and they say that's suspicious. So I have to drive to the bank, which I wasn't planning on because I have to pay the electricity bill so it doesn't get cut off so that I don't feel ashamed. And you pick today to put a plastic bag over your... this is outrageous. I have no capacity to prepare for this. And there's this huge tirade of shame, the inadequacy of the parent in an inadequate culture, meaning the parent is inadequate to handle these situations. The culture is inadequate to handle these situations, and the environment is inadequate. Meaning, in an environment that is this complex, with plastic bags flying all over around, they weren't around 500 years ago. So there weren't plastic bags to put over kids' heads. There weren't cars racing by. There weren't hairspray that can kill you in 2 seconds if you spray it in your mouth. There was 1,000 less possible ways to die just a few thousand years ago. And there was 1,000 less things to do. Mothers weren't running off to the bank unexpectedly because they get an automated message on their phone saying, oh, by the way, we decided that it was suspicious that you bought a roll of toilet paper at X gas station for $1.50, and then you bought a stack of paper over here for $3, so we've frozen your credit card. What? Why is that suspicious? I have no idea. Did anyone tell me if I buy paper, my card will be frozen? Did anyone this is outrageous. And so this, in other words, the culture is inadequate. It does not train parents, and it dissociates parents from the feminine and the emotions. The environment is inadequate. 2-year-old infants were not designed for 60-mile-an-hour buses, for front doors that open straight into streets, for traffic, for pedophiles that you don't even know when they come and go. These threats were not intended for a child, too. And parents were not intended to go off and do corporate jobs and then sink emotionally with their children and have the children take care of themselves, in these environments. None of this is designed with the child in mind. Not the car, not the environment, not the toxins in the house, not the location, not the design of the neighborhood. It's nothing to do with the child, which means that it is all inadequate, which means that there is a statistically high probability that these kinds of things will happen. And you could say the same thing with a dog. When you have a domesticated dog and don't have a professional dog trainer, and the dog isn't out in the wild, but is sometimes running underfoot for attention and sometimes away and doing what all the weird things that dogs do, sometimes it'll be stepped on. If you have a tiny dog, those steps on could be fatal. A tiny dog on concrete with 150-pound giant from the perspective of the dog, the scale is off. So this is just such an environment. But the point is, let's say at 4 years old, the bag incident happens. And again, there is absolute hatred, there's fear, there's a sense of not being able to breathe. And now there are trigger points. There are certain trigger points around cars. There are certain trigger points around voices that tell the child, I am not safe. I've got to dissociate. I've got to hyperventilate. I've got to panic. I see a plastic bag. I see my brother with a certain look in his eye. He says, hey, let's go do this. And that's what he said just before he put the bag over my head. And now we've got panic going on. Now we go to school and there's bullies behaving like my older brother. And so there is still an environment that is perfectly clear that will bypass all of this. If I'm not alone with my brother, if my mother's in a very good mood, if we've been laughing all day, if my father's also there being nice to her, if this, and this happens, all of these defenses and constellations of identity, because what am I now? I am now the unloved child. First I was the bad child, now I'm the unloved child who upsets my mother, and it's my fault. Maybe she gives me a long lecture about her job, her da-da-da-da-da, and all that I go away is feeling like her job would work, her life would work, her marriage would work, her body would work, her money would work, except for me. And what can I do? If I die, and I'm a horrible person for dying, but living, I am the worst thing that ever happened to her, where do I go? What happens with this identity? I'm the unwanted one. And so these different identities form, and each one has a window where if the tumblers are set just right in the environment, you get to go back to the original self. But as each year and each passing trauma and each crystallized identity, now I'm the humiliated one who nobody dates. Now I'm the stupid one who's always called on last in football. Now I'm the stupid one who's never knows the answer to calculus. Now I'm ugly because I've got pimples, and one person called me pimply face, and I thought about it 1,000 times, It just became so devastating. I'm now pimply face. And then this happened. Each one of these things is a constellation. And what happens is each one of these things get built by an environment that is not optimum. What do I mean? I mean, the optimum environment for a young child to become a sexual being is in a ritual in which their sexuality is honored by everyone, in which they experience mastery and success, in which they learn about emotional states, in which they learn about attraction and engagement, and develop successful mastery in sexuality, in courting, in engagement, in a culture that is intelligent enough to facilitate those without shame. In these environments, adolescents come into a sense of new mastery and fiery passion and excitement and self-acceptance and awareness. In our culture, where every curiosity around sex is shamed, teased, and dismissed, where it is taboo to talk about certain things, where things are segmented in weird ways around ages. If you're curious about this, you're a bad person. If you're curious about that, you're a bad person. If you have a photo of this, you are shamed in school, where you have not a single adult and mentor that guides you through the process, where you're humiliated for anything you do wrong rather than honored for the courage to make a mistake. It is an absolutely devastating and soul-sucking experience for an adolescent. So a lot of crystallization will occur in the adolescent years around sexual trauma, around romantic trauma, around secure attachments, around image, around perfectionism, and every single one of these is a mental, emotional dis-ease, often locked in the body as frozen moments of trauma that only melt if certain environmental forces come together in a massive way that never happens in most situations. For most of our adult lives, these layers just accumulate. Or that dissolve for brief periods of time, meaning there's this one moment at the waterfall in high school. There's this one moment when all your shyness evaporated, when you knew you were a king, when you felt your divine beauty as a woman, and you looked over and you saw that someone else was seeing you in your magnificence. And you were the person you wanted to be, and you asked for a kiss and you received it graciously, and it was the perfect moment. It all flowed together. And then your sister barged into the room and started teasing, and then your friends came, and then your mother rushed in and said, "What happened?" And you were too embarrassed to speak, and then she shouted at you for not speaking, and it all fell apart. That beautiful moment fell apart, and you're back into this stage where, again, you have the outer world, and every single one of these phenomena builds up layer by layer by layer by layer between the essential self that perhaps, not always, but perhaps you have a sense. Perhaps I have a sense of who I am on the inside, very deeply. This is me on the inside. I know who I am. This is me. And then here's my 2-year-old fear that is so panicked that I have to behave like this. Then here's my 4-year-old fear where I look away rather than looking confident in your eye. And here's my 6-year-old guilt that I nearly killed my 7-year-old sister and I feel like I'm a bad person. And you look at me and say you love me, and I think, no, you don't. You don't love someone who would kill a 6-year-old girl. I'm a bad person. You don't feel it. It goes through all of these different filters, one after another after another. And the more filters there are, the more it's as if there is now a 300 cycle combination lock. Now what I mean by that is, in a 4-number combination lock, you have to line up 4 digits, 4, 6, 2, 3, and then it opens. But in a 300 combination lock, you line up the 4, 6, 2, 3, 5, 8, 9, 10. Then you get the 11 wrong. And then you go on and you get the other 20 right, and you get the next 2 wrong, and it doesn't open. There is no direct portal with the self. What there is this gray area. Okay, we've got, 2-year-old open, 2-year-old trauma is able to connect in this environment. 32-year-old sexual trauma, able to connect in this moment. We're able to connect. 40-year-old guilt and divorce, that's not being triggered right at this moment. And then 41-year-old backlash, in which I did this and this and treated my rebound relationship terribly, and I feel so bad about that. I don't feel I deserve to be loved. But these 2 are open, the rest are closed. And the point is that every constellation, every dis-ease, every frozen bit of energy in thought and feeling and in the biology of the body, as every trauma is held in the body until it is released, builds up and builds up, number 1. Number 2, it takes energy, because the self is trying to connect with the world, but it's getting lost in this maze, and it's getting insane, it's getting confused, because the energy goes out here, then it has to come down to here, then it goes out, then it has to come up to here, up to here, up to here, then it has to go over to here, then it has to come out. And that's just in a very simple constellation. And then it doesn't feel direct, meaning the body language was saying this, but your words were saying this. It's not aligned. It's not integrated. My heart, mind, body at all my ages are not saying the same thing to you. My 2-year-old is saying, please don't hit me. Please don't shout at me. Please don't punish me. Whatever you do, don't punish me. My 4-year-old is saying, don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Whatever you do, don't kill me again. If I trust you, if I need you, don't kill me, please. My 6-year-old is saying, I'm a bad and evil person. You don't like me. I'm not the one you really like. I hurt little boys. My 8-year-old is saying, I'm terrified and I don't want to live. My 9-year-old is saying, well, I guess I'll have to get through it since I get punished for even wanting to die. My 10-year-old is saying this. My 11-year-old is saying this. My 12-year-old is saying, wow, you're really hot. But it is saying you're really hot after I don't want to die. Please don't kill me. I'm terrified, etc. And so what tends to happen in the emotional flows of these different ages and traumas as they build up through the body is that the outer world, the person who's looking in, first of all, is not looking directly in from an essential self that is clear of constellation and trauma. The outer world, metaphorically, is another human being who has a self in here, and a little gap here, and then 3 layers that are aligned against you with no clue of getting in, and then 1 layer that lets you in here, and then another layer that lets you in here, and then 10 more layers that are totally blocked off. And so it's, even if you've got an absolute direct lineup, you may experience those moments where there was this one afternoon, I felt completely and totally myself, worthy, valued, in my zone, contributing, smart, witty, welcome, alive. And then someone arrived, and they couldn't see it. I said this, and that was wrong because of this, because they've got a constellation that says they're not good enough. Maybe then they're comparing to me, and then it gets worse. So now they go into defense. Now then their defense is to attack because they're counterphobic. So now they're attacking that one great moment. And so then quickly that triggers the spiraling and the tumble switch, and I'm no longer the person I want to be. I'm now fighting for my life as a 2-year-old. I'm terrified as a 6-year-old. I'm running I'm feeling bad. I'm waiting to be punished. I'm feeling angry. Who's attacking me? Get out of my... And I'm thinking, oh gosh, that's inappropriate. I'm going to lose my job. I'm going through all of these different constellations in these psychological layers that I've built up year after year as coping strategies for one trauma after another that has not been healed. in a culture that is emotionally illiterate, that is trauma illiterate, that is biologically illiterate. Meaning that 99% of the people you and I bump into do not know how to turn joy into hate or hate into joy. They don't know how to turn despair into rage or rage into despair or despair and rage into determination and grit. They don't know how to do it. They don't know how to put names to words. They don't know vocabulary to communicate something like this visually. They don't know when to do it. They don't know why to do it. And they can't tell the other person either. They can't see the other person. They can't communicate or work with these dynamics. They can only react, deflect, deny on an unconscious level. That is emotional illiteracy. That is biological illiteracy, to say, I don't know which of my emotions are frozen in my body versus things that I really have flexibility of change. Which of my emotions are frozen into an identity and which ones are fluid and flowing like water. I don't know. I don't know any of it. I just know that I look like an idiot if I talk about feelings, so I just say everything's good, everything's fine, everything's fine, things are cool, good, everything cool with you, good. Let's move on. Let's get out of this space. Oh God, I made it to my room alone, and oh my God, they almost saw one of those things. I almost got frozen there. I better avoid them for the next 3 weeks. And so there's this dance that goes on here. Now, so what does this reveal? Why is this exciting? Well, one of the things I've always known, I mean, I've got about 15 different tumblers that are major tumblers, meaning I know what they are, I know how to line them, and I know how to create an environment in which if someone or a group will cooperate with me to create an environment that aligns those 15 tumblers such that there is a direct corridor between my essence and that group or that individual, I can be my best self. If 2 or 3 of the tumblers are out of alignment, I can do a little bit of a mental workaround. I can kind of imagine, how would my best self behave if this person hadn't been triggering me about this, if they hadn't lied to me about that, if they hadn't muddied the environment and triggered these constellations, how would I be behaving? And I can will myself to a certain extent to be that person. Kind of, it's not how I feel like being, it's not what's going on inside, but I can speak as if I was in a clear place, if that makes sense. But if all of these tumblers are sitting around, I am a collapsed emotional mess and can't get out of bed. And so my job is to create environments that do not activate and trigger all these tumblers in the wrong way, and that partner with me to create a very clear path through all of the different barriers and traumas in life that make them conscious, and that a partner who takes the time, and it does take time to understand what went on at 2-year-old, what went on at 4 years old, what went on at 8-year-old. My partner just the other day, this is my new film studio, and my 8-year-old is very excited and very possessive of this studio, because it was my 8-year-old going through the absolute despair and indignity and helplessness of parents and siblings in a boundaryless house just invading as he tried to create a sense of privacy and identity, whether it was journaling, just complete invasion and violation. And so my 8-year-old needs an arena in life that is his, and that no one goes in there or nobody touches this unless he says so. That's what my 8-year-old needs. And if that is given to my 8-year-old, he releases his tumbler. And there is no longer a terrified, angry, defiant, protective, defensive 8-year-old in the mix. There is a gracious 8-year-old that says, I'm in charge. Nobody touches this without my permission. And he's very magnanimous. I grant you my permission to enter my studio for this time. Give him that, He's magnanimous. He's proud. My 8-year-old is doing, look at what I did here. Look at what I did there. He's excited. He has a lot to contribute. Or he says, no, I'm not talking to you. You entered my studio. You didn't knock on my door. You didn't do this. It's like, oh. So my girlfriend, who feels touchy about, and feels like she's a terrible person, that nobody likes her, when certain tumblers are tricked and tipped. She comes in. Here, I brought you some juice. Oh, you came in without knocking. You didn't. I told you not to enter my studio. That's my 8-year-old. Well, then she immediately goes into her 17-year-old, who, someone's setting her up and nobody is fair. So her 7, fine. I'm never coming in your fucking studio again. And 8-year-old, no. I want you to come in. I just want to be the one inviting you. It's the boundary issue here. It's not, I love you coming to my studio when I invite you, not just when you want to come. Well, I'm not interested anymore. Who needs to come in? And I'm like, hello, Jen. Look, let's talk as adults here. My 8-year-old needs that. And so I purchased a whole apartment to give him that. And you are very welcome there if you can respect his boundary. If you can't, then you're not. But it's not because you are unwelcome or a fixated identity. It's because you are unwelcome to cross the one area that's his boundary, without asking, and thus trigger a dynamic that you don't want to experience in me. Because I'm not the me that you love when I'm all caught up around who's crossed my boundary. I'm in a dynamic. I'm not me. And so there's this coaching dynamic that needs to happen. First of all, they need to become conscious, number one. Number two, there's no shame in any of this. A 2-year-old infant being raged at by their mother and flooded out into dissociation, and then told that it never exists and told they had a happy childhood and forgotten it all and starts drinking, they're not going to get over it. It takes work, it takes time, it takes empathy before these parts will speak. And it takes an incredibly intelligent partner that doesn't just poo-poo this kind of stuff, but actually wants to learn. And so one of the great challenges and frustrations I have is I have these moments of alignment when everything lines up. And in those moments, people say, wow, you're a genius. I'm so lucky to know you. I've learned more in your presence than I've learned, in 6 years of therapy. I love this. This is so incredible. The intensity is it's just profound. And that's a moment in which I had control of the environment and support from the individual for all of these things to line up beautifully. And then I have other moments where someone says, you're a completely self-absorbed jerk. You're stupid. You're da-da-da-da-da. I want nothing to do with you. You're weird. Da-da-da-da-da. And these are moments when, when I woke up, the 2-year-old's trigger was hit like that. Then, before I checked my email, the 4-year-old trigger was hit like this. The 6-year-old trigger was here. And then someone surprises me, and I've got 15 layers of dynamic defenses running in my body, and I've lost touch with who I am. And I have no idea who is really out there. I have 15 projections of abusive dynamics, and I'm trying to peer through that fog of moving trauma and dissociated chaos and be somewhat functional and feel safe in a state of absolute terror. And I just have no time and no patience for consensus posturing that. I'm just trying to survive. No, I don't have time to brush my hair. No, I just don't have time. I'm just trying to get through the day. And you are joining me in that tumble, and you're creating that tumble by insisting on doing this, by not taking the cue, by refusing to listen, by forgetting when I say please arrive on time, because I go into instability if someone's late and no communication. When I say please arrive on time and you don't, you've just now you're dealing with that trigger of abandonment. Then when I say, could you please not interrupt me, and you interrupt me 3 times with critical comments, now you're dealing with the trigger of everyone's judging me and hating me and da-da-da. And then when I say, would you let in this compliment, and then you argue with me, now you're telling me I have nothing to give, you've just triggered that. So we're 15 triggers in, and we're just into the first hour of our interaction. Now you're seeing a me that this person never sees. And it's the worst possible me. And I know what's bringing it out. It's like being the rose with a gardener who puts me in the shade, refuses to water me, refuses to give me any light, refuses to give fertilizer, and steps on me, and then starts shouting at me, why won't you grow? Why won't you grow? Which brings back the 2-year-old mother dynamic, in a stampede of chaos and intensity, that there's no way I can win here. I just want to die. And then when I'm wanting to die in that stampede, the person is just going on and on. It's like, please leave. And then they're all angry that I've abandoned them without paying a single moment's attention, because they're busy in their own world. And so this is a diagram. And what I want to illustrate in this about what brings out our worst selves and our best selves is that different things in the environment are always causing different of these constellations to turn and pivot. The only time we are truly our authentic self is when all of them are aligned and the lock of defenses opens and the true self flows out. And this lasts as long as that sacred moment is there. And then a startled alarm clock, a phone call from an unwelcome relative, complaining about something that reactivates a memory, the person saying they have to go and triggering abandonment issues, smoke in the face, an allergy that wasn't supposed to be there that triggers things like, I told you I had allergies, now you're feeding me poison, all these different things, and then the whole moment lifts and shifts. Now we're dealing with the constellation, not the human being, not the human spirit dealing with another human spirit. So this is the great and complex art of human relationship. And it is a diagram and a pattern that can illustrate the way co-infections. I have a loneliness dynamic about this. I have a rage dynamic like this. I have a shame dynamic here, here, and here. I have an inadequacy dynamic over here. I have a superior dynamic over here. This triggers the superiority about this while I feel inadequate about this. And they're both going at the same time. I feel like I'm an inadequate human being, but I'm a superior mathematician. So I'm condescending in my role as a mathematician as I'm terrified and feeling, I hope you don't find out that I'm not a good lover. So I'm feeling terrified at 2 years old, condescending at 15 years old, uncertain at 18 years old. And it's all in play, moving and shifting. And the trick is to systematically bring the dynamic to consciousness and partner to create environments and moments in time in which the best self is predisposed by creating those points that do not handle any of the trigger points, where you can talk about complete desperation and nobody judges you, where you can collapse and panic and someone holds you. Then you lift out of the panic and you're back to being a masterful adult again. I was a 2-year-old quivering child for 10 minutes, but because you loved me rather than shouting at me, now I'm a magnificent human being again. And so this is this delicate dance. It's very complicated for an illiterate culture, emotionally, mentally, psychologically, and biologically. but it is the dance of beauty. It is the dance of coming towards that truth and knowing that you on the inside are beautiful and I on the inside are beautiful. And it takes as much grace and skill as it does to land a 747, to land a psyche that is healthy and whole, all the way from this universe in which I exist into the essence and the universe in which you exist, in such a way that you feel safe and honored, and I feel safe and honored.